Welcome and thank you for tuning in to Cryptids, Creeps, and Conspiracy. The following content may involve explicit language and materials, so listener discretion is advised. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we have a guest of kinds we have never had before. So this is Garrett K. Jones, and he's with GKJ Publishing. I've not had an author on here yet. I'm going to open up the floor to you and give you the opportunity to tell the people that are listening a little bit about who you are, what you do, and anything else you want to tell us.
Thanks, Natasha. As you said, my name is Garrett K. Jones, and my publishing label is GKJ Publishing, which is kind of a joke. GKJ is my initials, and so adding that into the word publishing, so it's literally me publishing. I've so far published 6 books of original work. 5 are part of an ongoing fantasy series that I've been working on for 23 years now. The first book published in 2015. The most recent one came out in February of this year. And then I have a book of original poetry that most of it was penned during my college days, and I didn't publish it until just a few years ago.
Okay, awesome. So when you say fantasy, I've got to ask. I know that fantasy is kind of a broad thing. It could be anything from monsters to outer space to fairy tale type. Do you have a certain niche, whatever you call that?
For the stuff that I write more of the epic fantasy, so sword and sorcery type stuff.
Oh.
So it, like, when I do table sales at events, I say it's the things I liken it to are, it's like Lord of the Rings, just not as much unnecessary walking, and it's like Game of Thrones without all the excess nudity.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
That'd be right up my alley. Only, unfortunately, I don't read.
Well, I've been trying to work on getting audiobooks out there. It's a little bit tricky when I'm having to do a lot of stuff myself.
Speaking of, swords and sorcery and stuff, it sounds like a character that you might be familiar with, is possibly of the dragon variety.
Oh, absolutely. My books are actually chock full of dragons. In fact, the second book in my series is called The Destiny of Dragons. And so dragons, at least in my series, just to kind of give you a brief idea, is that dragons are kind of an endangered species. In the book opens 250 years prior to the main part of the story, and this warlord went on a killing spree, killing as many dragons as he possibly could by whatever means necessary, to the point where there's only there's at least 100 dragons in existence, but they're few and far between, and they are hiding.
Okay, that makes total sense. I don't know if it would be too much of a giveaway if I ask this. So if you don't want to answer, that's fine. But in your particular scenario, I feel there's usually a underlying reason as to why they're trying to exterminate the dragons.
Yeah. So the premise is that he had been selected to be a part of this group of magic users that were supposed to be bonded with dragons, and as part of the charge, they are supposed to undergo evaluation, not just for their physical skills or their magical skills, but also their psychological and emotional health. And it was predicted that he would be a very dangerous person if he was given access to this kind of power, because dragons are sentient. It would be a spiritual bond, and they were afraid that this would create that problem that they were going to have. And what ends up happening is he takes that the wrong way. Instead of being mature about it, he goes completely the opposite direction, holds a grudge. And so one of the questions that pops up frequently throughout the books is, was he already bad? And was that the thing that they're all racing, or did he go bad because he was rejected?
that makes a lot of sense, and that's what I was saying. It just kind of seems like there's always some kind of underlying if then kind of situation. But I would love to live in this world, because how badass would it be to have your own personal fucking dragon?
Here's something you'll appreciate then, Natasha. One of the main characters in book one, his name's Gavin. He's a ranger, and he is befriended by a dragon named Nex when he's about 7 or 8 years old, living in an orphanage. And Nex is about 300 years old, but he was put into kind of a suspended animation for most of his life, and it kept him from growing. So he's about the size of a house cat.
Yeah, I would prefer a big giant one I could sick on people.
It's really cute, and especially considering the fact that they work in tandem, and like there are scenes where Nex is just perched on Gavin's shoulder or just walking around with him. And I got the idea for the design based on a cat that adopted my family, and she would just perch on my shoulders and walk around.
That's so stinking cute. So
Yeah.
I do have to also ask. So we're just going to kind of like go back and forth. We are freestyling this bee's niche, right?
I love it.
Because I'm going to use some of the stuff that I've researched along with what you're telling me to see if I could get some more information. So in your book, I'm picturing this tiny little baby dragon who's probably cute as freaking shit. And which type of dragon did you base them off of physically? I know the European style is more of the four-legged winged, strictly scales, whereas the Asian type tend to be more serpent. They have like the little manes of hair and whiskers, but no wings.
So I actually use a mixture depending on. So most of the dragons have that European four-legged with wings design, but there's a couple of dragons that are introduced in book two. They are elders, and they are supposed to teach Gavin. And one of them, she lives on this volcanic island, and she's essentially a wyvern. So she's two-legged, but her arms form the wings, and so she has claws and stuff like that. And then there's another dragon that's introduced who is a water dragon, and this one is the body of the dragon is serpentine, but more like an eel or a fish. And instead of fire, she spits out like this acidic substance.
I want that one as my spirit dragon. Movies that have depictions of dragons in them, primarily, I'm not gonna lie, I will fess up, most of the movies I watch, there's a fine line between ghost movie, murder mysteries, and children's cartoons. So a lot of them are animated, but there is this one I wish I could remember. Is it Raya or something?
Raya?
Yeah, and it had a serpentine dragon that was similar to what you're describing, was kind of like the water and all that, and she was so cool. I mean, I just
Yeah.
wanted to find her, take her home with me. She was awesome. One thing too is you mentioned them having claws, and I read somewhere that depending on how many claws are on each paw supposedly symbolize something, but I don't know what it symbolizes. Do you know maybe what that is?
That's not something I'm familiar with. I mostly, as far as my research into dragons, it's been mostly different styles, themes, designs, and stuff like that. So like I've got one dragon, he's an earth elder, and the way he's designed, he's a drake essentially. And drakes are wingless quadrupedal dragons. Because he lives underground, he has a tendency, like he grows hair over his body, like parts of his body, like on his forelimbs and like the ridge of his neck and back. So he's kind of like a mole, only reptilian.
Because a lot of times when you do see dragons, you typically see them in like air or fire, obviously, or water type, but you don't normally see a dragon in the earth style. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I wanted to go for something that was just a little bit different, especially for a character that doesn't spend a whole lot of time, outside of he lives inside this huge gigantic monolith that sits in the middle of this grassy plain. And the only way to access it is you have to climb this vertical tower to go to the opening at the top, and then you have to climb back down.
He's not my kind of dragon.
He's actually a really cool dragon. He's a very nice and very kind dragon. And
I'm a dragon. I want vengeful.
well, then you would definitely like the fire dragon I mentioned before. She absolutely hates humanity.
Yeah.
Anytime people show up on her island, she has these familiars that they look like lions, but their bodies are hairless and their manes are made of fire. And she sends them out after whoever's on her island.
Okay, we got to make these books a movie. Because
Animated series, but that's my preference.
because that is so stinking cool. And it's just, I've always liked the idea of a dragon, like the stereotypical, of course, because they represent, it seems like, I mean, they're powerful, powerful creatures, but for the most part, they're also, very wise. And a lot of people want that like knowledge that they have, or they seek the guidance or advice of these dragons and all of that. And I've just always been, and they can fly. So they
Well,
can breathe fire, they can fly, they can do all of these things, and it's just so cool.
so one of the things that I've done is within my series is that dragons, elves, humans, and vampires are all very intertwined. So, like, for example, the progenitor of the dragons, he is, and I don't want to, well, it's going to give something away, but like he actually becomes the first vampire.
Okay.
And the first victims that he goes after are one of the 7 breeds of elf, which are called shadowkin, and they're dark elves.
Okay.
So unlike your true elves, which are mostly vegetarian, live during the daytime, they're diurnal. These were nocturnal, they ate meat. And so because he initially fed on them, they became his first thralls and they became vampires. And they're actually a very short-lived species comparatively, because there's only been about 200 to 300 years that this has all taken place. And so with that, there is a connection between these elves and human beings that they have turned into vampires, as well as the dragons, and so it's all very intertwined. That there's no disconnection.
I think I need to live in this world, I'm telling you. Because this is all like this is my jam, right? All of these things. I mean, elves and vampires. And although I am curious about your thing, because typically vampires feed off of humans.
Yep.
I've never heard of them, feeding off of elves before, but that's super cool.
Well, when this particular dragon became the first vampire, it was completely by accident. It's a cornerstone of some of the events in my 3rd book, which is called Rise of the Shadowkin. And so he goes after these elves thinking that they were the ones who had wronged him, and just in biting them and feeding off them, they get turned. And so it wasn't intentional for them to become vampires. He just passed that curse on to them.
Okay, that makes sense. So what I think would be kind of cool, kind of a buzzkill for these dark elves would be, I mean, okay, so think about it. All right, so you have elves, and they're magical, and they can do all of these things, and generally they're really freaking hot, and that's always a perk. But in my mind's kind of thinking, okay, in order to become a vampire, you in a sense have to die, correct?
More or less. I mean, you become undead.
Because I feel like, almost in a buzzkill kind of sense, if you were an elf and you typically were powered by, nature and goodness and magical. Like once you died though, you lose that.
Okay, so that's exactly where this comes into play. So it's like you've read my book or something.
Like,
So
I,
yeah, they so those who become vampires do get cut off from magical abilities.
okay.
But yeah, I don't want to give anything away because I want people to read the book, but the vampires get redeemed because by the time you get to the third book, they're a dying race.
Oh, yeah. Okay. If that you have the dark and the light, right? I don't know, normal and nighttime. I don't know how that elves separate, but if you were a quote unquote regular elf and then you turned, you essentially would then die and be reborn into this dark elf potentially. Because
Yes.
what if the dragon who bites you somehow, like, so your magic dies, the nice earthly source of your magic dies, but when the dragon bites you, it somehow transfers some of its abilities onto you, but you're still dead, so you end up turning into this like dark thing.
You really need to read my book. It explains so much, and I don't want to give anything away.
Okay, well we'll swap. We'll move on to something else, because I actually have Dracos in here too, with them being Latin and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have a question about this is a physical characteristic that I was wondering if it had relevance. I know a lot of times you see like the European style dragons as having a spade shaped tail.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a purpose for that, or
I think it comes down to like a design, because I mean you look at some animals in nature and they develop certain characteristics based on their environment. So like and one of my running jokes that I've had, and it used to really annoy the heck out of my ex-wife, is that I claim that we have completely misidentified dinosaurs, that they're just dragons, that we've jumbled up the bones and we've gotten it all wrong. Because like you take a look, for example, at the ankylosaurus, and it has like that spiky club tail, which is perfect for like just completely destroying something or demolishing something. Or you look at a stegosaurus with the bony plates and the spikes on its tail.
yep.
Expensive, very Godzilla-ish in its design.
There's, oh my gosh, hold on. What is it? I can see it. It's in Jurassic Park 3. And it's got a big fin.
The
Huh?
Spinosaurus.
Yes. So
Yeah.
what if those bones that they found, one, they only found a few of those bones, starters. Right. And for them to say that there's a sail on its back almost makes me wonder if, again, it's laying down, it landed. What if it landed wrong? And that sail, if you turn it sideways, is in fact a wing, like a wingspan.
Well, that would be hard to do because like wings are usually based out of like the shoulder sockets or near them. And so like, for example, if you're dealing with like a wyvern, which has two hind legs and its forelimbs make up the wings, then it would definitely be shooting out of the shoulder joints, which would be typical. You see that with birds, you see that with bats. But if it's more of the typical European style where you have four legs and then the wings act as like a third pair of limbs, it's the biology is a little bit different, and so then you'd have to look at where those joints are connecting, which it would still be close to the shoulders just because of where the weight would be balanced.
I mean, but I think those wings would have to be to carry something that heavy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But then you have to take a look at the biology of it. Like birds, the reason why they're able to weigh so much and move so quickly through the air is because their bones are hollow.
Yeah.
They're incredibly dense, but they're hollow, and their body is filled with all these air sacs.
I wonder if they've checked the bones to see if they are.
Well, that's where like the running theory of like dinosaurs evolving into birds comes into play, because like the closest living relative to the T-Rex is a chicken.
Yeah.
And the closest living relative to a velociraptor, I think, is a turkey.
Yeah.
So
Have a
it's it's
giant
hard
toe.
to say, but I like to have fun with it. And
I mean,
um
I possible. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, really, pterodactyls. All you do is throw in some fire breathing abilities. Dragon, boom.
yep, absolutely.
And who's to say that they didn't have that? I mean, you don't know what the atmosphere was like. They could have had some kind of gastrointestinal something, or an acid or venom, or something that may have reacted to the air once released.
Well, and what's funny is that like there have been a couple of movies that have come out in the last few years that explore what that would be. Like there was a movie that came out in 2002 called Reign of Fire with Matthew McConaughey and Christian Bale, and it was like the it was almost like a mix, two different mixtures of saliva that were come from glands
Yeah.
inside the dragon's mouth that when
When you
connected with
yeah,
when it hits oxygen and they blend together is almost like a napalm.
yeah. And I think it was something about they got it to close its mouth, something about, and it exploded in its mouth and its head exploded or whatever. I don't know if
Yeah,
it's the same, but it's the same concept. I think it's plausible. I mean, with all the crap that we have, I mean, think about it. There was a shark bigger than a fucking school bus.
mm-hmm.
In theory, people don't even think that it's totally gone.
Well, that would be, I mean, we would be having a lot of reports about people missing, whole boats of people going missing if that was the case.
There's so much of the ocean that people aren't in. They wouldn't even be exposed to it.
That's true. I mean, we know more about what's going on in outer space than we do in our own oceans.
Yeah, and I mean, they just, what was it, 5, 10 years ago, maybe, found out about this, the Kraken literally exists. They found a
Yeah.
giant squid that was like huge.
Yeah, they knew it existed or they theorized it existed. They just barely found a photograph of it.
Yeah, and it's just, well, they're even pulling up squids where, 20 feet long.
Yeah.
That's huge. And
Yeah.
and they have marks on them that appear that something bigger had tried to get it. So I don't see why not. I mean,
Yeah.
I now whether or not dragons exist now, I mean, clearly people would see them if they were flying through the sky, right?
Yeah. It could be. I mean, the premise of Reign of Fire was that is actually a really fun premise because it was post-apocalyptic, and the idea was that the dragons had been in hibernation for however many centuries, and they were awoken in the 20th century and went just spreading amok. And they get to a point where they're like locusts; they consume everything. They start dying off. They go back. A small number go back into hibernation. The world continues on, rebuilds, and they come
Oh,
back. What?
they would have had to have been gone for so long. Could anything even survive, like hibernate that long?
Theoretically, I mean, bears can hibernate for 6 months out of the year. You
Well,
know,
that's not, I mean, it'd be really interesting to see when the last dragon sighting was reported, because I hadn't made it that far whenever I got through it. I was still in other research mode.
well, that's not something I'm familiar with, but I mean, think about some of the creatures that we have in existence today. I mean, saltwater crocodiles, for example, are some of the largest living reptiles on the planet, and they can live for years. I mean, we're talking about a reptile that actively goes out into the ocean and will fight a great white shark.
Yeah.
And they're massive. They get up to 20, 30 feet long, and they're monsters. And while it doesn't breathe fire and doesn't have wings, I mean, that's huge. And reptiles are known for having slow aging processes. They don't have the same telomere degradation that other creatures like mammals or birds or humans have, and they live for relatively long lifespans.
Yeah. So I did see, according to this, the last official reported sighting of a dragon was in China, and it was in 1905.
Hmm.
So assuming that was the last sighting and they did hibernate, that's still, I mean, that is a long hibernation. Like, I'm just like, how could you survive for that long?
Well, it depends on where they draw their energy stores from. Because like with mammals, especially those that hibernate, they will hibernate and feed off of whatever fat stores that they develop. Like bears, for example, when
Yeah.
they go into their hibernation mode.
Years?
Well, but I mean, again, think about it. There are reptiles, there are organisms that will go into a hibernation mode for years on end when the conditions are right. Their body temperature goes down, and other, like, the blood flow slows down just a little bit, and they will actually go into a hibernative state for just a couple of years until the conditions outside are good for them to come back to life. Frogs do that too.
Yeah, I'm just thinking it's just such a long period. I mean, the longest one I could think of was that it's what I would assume is similar in physiology are snakes, but they still are, from the looks of this, they have to eat every week or two. And they're much smaller than what I would picture a dragon being. So they would have to require even more food. But at the same time, who's to say we don't have dragons? They just don't look like the stereotypical dragons, because whales used to walk on land.
Yeah, that's true. And
Maybe
well,
they
go ahead.
maybe they lost like their wings, and they lost certain things. I mean, hell, maybe this little gecko is just used to be a dragon. This
Maybe.
little
And the other thing to think about is, earlier we mentioned Godzilla before we started recording. And one of the key concepts of Godzilla, because he's essentially a gigantic sea dragon, is that Godzilla feeds off of radioactive material, especially at the Earth's core. So when he goes to hibernate, he goes deep under the ocean because he's got gills. He's able to hold his breath and breathe water, and so he's able to hide underneath, close to the Earth's core, and just absorb that ambient energy,
that makes sense.
and that feeds him. And the only reason why he woke up, well, especially if you pay attention to most iterations of Godzilla, the only reason why he woke up from his hibernative state is because we started detonating atomic weapons, and that triggered him to be like, hey, new food source, let's check it out.
Like a dinner bell.
Right, exactly. And most animals show up, I mean, in the wild, for one of three F's: to find food, to fight, or to do something a little bit more intimate.
One thing I did think was kind of like looking at like the differences in like structures and abilities and whatnot of the different types of dragons. I mean, obviously the European one, I mean, that makes sense. The damn thing's got wings. Now, granted, I don't know what capacity, because I'm just thinking, I don't know how big these wings are. I don't know how heavy the animal is. Just strictly looking at an animal standpoint. But
Right.
there's also dragons reported more in the Asian sector, where they don't have wings, yet they somehow manage to fly.
And usually that has to do with magic, because like if you go back to European legends, not all dragons have magical abilities. Usually they're just either considered mindless animals, or they're animals of legend with some level of sentience. Whereas you go with the Asian style, and they're almost like demigods, where they have magical abilities. They helped create various parts of existence. There's so many creation myths, especially in the Orient, of dragons being a part of those stories, where they come to play. Other times they might be problematic. Whereas you look at the Naga of Hindu mythology, where they're dangerous. Or if you look at
Christianity's got it. I mean, there's just serpents. They have the same word, dragon.
well, and part of that, especially in Christianity, if you go back to the ancient Near East, snakes were considered unclean animals because of them crawling around in the dirt. So there's a cultural element to it. But then if you go back to even further to like the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Enuma Elish, dragons or serpents are looked at in one of two ways. Usually, and especially in the ancient Near East, they're looked at as elements of chaos and death and destruction. Because like Tiamat was a dragon in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and Tiamat was incredibly dangerous. all of her children became monsters of some kind or another, and she was kind of this embodiment of destruction and chaos and disorder.
Kind of like a Lilith. So,
Yeah.
well, Lilith, Lilith was, supposedly Adam's original mate in some
If
sources.
you're looking at things from like Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, yes. Although,
Well, I
uh,
was thinking her children were like she created the demons.
yeah, but if you go back into scripture, it actually indicates that demons are fallen angels that that sided with Lucifer when he tried to usurp God's throne, and that gets talked about in Isaiah. So it again, it depends on where you're pulling your sources, but yeah, there's also like legends that Lilith was like the first vampire.
I can see that. Lilith is just a bad name.
Yes, which is
I
why I think they used it for Fraser's wife.
I I didn't even think about that. Oh, that is too good. But yeah, it's just something that kind of pops up, and it almost seems like, I mean, although the European dragons are still, they have that magical, mystical air to them, they are more likely to be the cryptids, whereas the Asian and Middle Eastern is strictly magical,
Yeah.
spiritual, and really no
Well,
hardcore.
and it has to do with how they're looked at, because the further east you go, the more deified they become. Because like you look at Western European mythology, and they are just a monster. You look at ancient Near East, and they are a supernatural embodiment of destruction and chaos. You look at the Far East, and they become benevolent, and they are creators, and they are wise. And so modern pop culture tends to pull from all of that and kind of pulls it depending on how the writer wants to work it into the story, whatever it is.
So I also know that I've heard lore and stuff. I didn't dig into it, but you always hear about like one of their weaknesses is they have this, this like craving or I guess obsession with gold.
Yeah, that came out of, I want to say, Western European folklore, especially in Germanic and Scandinavian myth. This idea of hoards of treasure, and there's kind of a running joke amongst fellow authors that librarians hoard books and are therefore dragons, which would make sense. I knew a librarian who we nicknamed Dragon Lady when I was in grade school. But the it again, it really depends. Like, you see a lot of that happening with Smaug in The Hobbit. You have that happen with the dragon from the end of Beowulf. People are going in stealing gold from the treasure trove, and the dragon gets pissed off and just starts wreaking havoc on Beowulf's kingdom, and he dies fighting it. Whereas other dragons, they might hoard knowledge, depending on what it is.
Okay.
But it's not a universal thing.
Yeah, because I mean I've heard it, but I was like, well, I don't really know. I'm debating whether or not I want to go here because it is so fucking far out there. But it's just to make my little alien people happy. But if you think about it, okay, let's think. All right, so there is also a theory
Okay.
that we people, whatever, are mining gold for the aliens, right? Because they want gold for whatever stuff they're creating, I guess. I don't know. And I am thinking, if a very long time ago, these people saw a quote unquote beast that's obsessed with gold that can fly, like, could they have misinterpreted anything craft wise or creature wise that would also have been flying from the skies and obsessed with gold?
It's entirely possible. I mean, the idea of aliens being obsessed with gold, that it's definitely an L. Ron Hubbard take on things, especially if you've read about, was it battlefield Earth. But gold is one of those things that's found in meteorites and gets brought to Earth from space, so that they'd have a better chance of mining it out in the stars. Who knows?
Well, do it for them, and they wouldn't have. They're lazy. Oh God, please don't abduct me. You're not lazy. You work really hard.
So it's really, yeah. I mean, that it's anything's possible, because I mean, I don't necessarily buy into the ancient alien vibe, but it's entirely possible that you have something like that. Because I mean, you go back to what Arthur C. Clarke said, that any form of technology can, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but it can be misconstrued as magic or something else.
Every new technology appears as magic.
Right.
Because
right. And so, I mean, if I was to take my iPhone and I was to transport myself even 100 years in the past, they would be like, what is this?
Yeah.
And whereas if I were to teleport myself, 50 years into the past, which would be 1973, they'd be like, did you just step off the set of Star Trek?
Yeah.
Which I'd be like, yes, I have.
I have. But I also, what I thought was like really kind of almost humorous. I'm not sure how I feel about it yet. Was I read that like their like enemy are elephants, and they would hide along the trails that elephants would come down, and they would attack them and wrap their tails around them and suffocate them. And I was like, and I'm assuming these are the ones from India and Ethiopia, by the way.
Okay. I just pulled this up, and it's like, it says giant dragon fighters. They were said to be the mortal enemies of dragons, just as elephants represented Christ. I don't know where that comes from. Dragons represented the devil, and several medieval illustrations showed elephants giving birth in lakes so that dragons could not seize their babies. Huh. That's a new one for me.
That's a new. And then another thing it pointed out was that supposedly dragons fear the paradoxian tree, and they stay out of the shadows of the tree. And something about they dislike the sweet smell when a panther roars.
Interesting. Now that you say that about the panther, I'm immediately having flashbacks to Anchorman.
Oh God, I haven't seen that forever.
But he's got the cologne Sex Panther. 60% of the time it works every time.
Yeah, because we were talking about how it probably smelled like cat spray on the carpet or something. Ugh. Blech. That guy's such a doofus.
The second movie was not nearly as good.
No, it was not.
Yeah, that's definitely a rabbit hole I'm gonna have to start looking down, because these are two, like the paradox tree and the whole elephant thing. Those are completely new elements for me, and so that's something I could have fun with.
Oh, awesome. I also saw where they supposedly have this like translucent or transparent like white gem in, like, it's in their brain.
Huh.
And these gems are, really valuable because you got to kill the dragon to get it, of course. And not only that, but it's only valuable if you can remove it from a live dragon. So what they would do is they would come up with this herbal cocktail, feed it to the dragon so it knocks itself out, and then they would decapitate. Sorry, I swore I just heard a drill out there, and I don't know what the fuck would be drilling out there. But they would decapitate it and then hurry to try to remove the gem before the heart quit beating. So I guess it's more of a physical death and not a mental death. But you just got to remove it from that. And if you don't, and it dies before you remove the gem will dissolve.
Huh. Yeah, that's also a new one to me. Usually when I've been writing my books, usually the most traditional ways of dragons dying have been either being stabbed, speared, shot with arrows, which is harder to do because their scales are very, very dense and very armored. Oh, yeah. But then there is one scene in the beginning of my first book where it mentions a dragon was pierced between the scales with a dragon's bane arrow. And so I kind of just created something called Dragon's Bane based off of like the idea of Wolf's Bane. But then I have another dragon character who's actually corrupted by dark magic and somehow obtains a quasi-human form between books 1 and 2, ends up getting a hold of this ancient artifact that allows him to essentially become a necromancer. And so he ends up stealing the soul of several dragons simultaneously.
Okay, that's pretty cool. I swear I must somehow be linked to your brain, because literally you're talking about and I am literally picturing it, like I know exactly what you're talking about. Like the piercing and the dragon's bane. I'm like, have we talked before? Because it's like I know this and I don't know, I could never possibly know this, but I'm like, this sounds really familiar. But one thing I did think was also kind of interesting, because typically once the dragon is dead, people just kind of leave it. However, from what I gathered here, parts of the dragon could be used for medicine, and they would take the tongue, the eyes, the gall, and the intestines and boil them in wine and then let them sit overnight in open air. And then after that, the next day, whoever needed it for whatever purpose, they would apply it to them in the morning and at night. They said they're also, you can eat them. You can eat a dragon. They just said, whatever you do, don't eat the gall, because I don't know. It just says, don't do it.
Interesting. I would assume it would be very gamey and taste very similar to rattlesnake. That would be my first thought. Having eaten rattlesnake, it tasted very much like chicken with a little bit of a twinge of something in it.
I wonder if you could taste the magic. Well,
Maybe.
no, I feel like when I feel anything that is magic, I feel that once it dies, all of the magic is lost.
Well, if we look at magic as being just a form of energy, energy doesn't get destroyed. It just gets reabsorbed and redirected.
Okay.
Just from a physics perspective. So,
yeah.
And at least the way that I've played magic out is that there is a celestial race that is responsible for creating all the different sentient races, including dragons, in my series, and it's their presence that bleeds over and allows for magic to exist.
You can't conjure magic?
You can. Some people have a stronger connection to it, and you can learn to conjure magic, but there are certain beings that have a almost like a so like dragons would have a preternatural connection to it, whereas like we talked about before, the vampires are disconnected from it because they're not technically living.
Yeah, that would make sense.
So and then there's like the character that the dragon character that is corrupted by dark magic and regains like a humanoid body. He is at like after he's corrupted, he's disconnected from magic, but when he gains that humanoid body, he's reconnected to it. But because he gets a hold of that artifact, it allows him to have a very specific control over magic that he didn't have before.
I mean, I guess that makes sense. I was kind of viewing it more in a sense of out with one, in with new, right? So with death comes life. And what if, dragons lay eggs, right?
Right.
And these eggs stay dormant until another dragon is slain. And then it, essence or magic or whatever is then transferred to the egg and allows it to hatch.
That would be cool. I mean, I could see that making sense. And so maybe there's just like one dragon hanging out and sleeping, and it hasn't died yet.
Yeah.
That's why we haven't seen it.
Yeah. I mean, I just think of it because with me, magic is like kind of, I don't want to say necessarily transferable, but I can't think of a better word. But almost like it, it doesn't disappear per se.
Right.
It could either be passed on or converted into an object or material or something of that nature. You know what I mean? Kind of
Yeah.
like when a witch dies, if you know she's got magic and all of that, or an elf or whatever, and they die, and say this is going to be like totally like a stupid example, but because elves are a lot of times kind of woodland type creatures. What if they die and like a tree, like a special type of tree, or they die and a fairy is born, or something where it's like it transfers from one to the other. It doesn't necessarily disappear, but it also cannot be captured. So it's not like you could slay all these dragons and gain all their power. Like I feel like it would be different than that.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not I don't think it would be talking like exactly like a Highlander type situation, but yeah. That would be very interesting.
Because then you would also have this whole anticipation of what if there is one last dragon egg and you have to protect that dragon egg until the next dragon dies. Because if you destroy that egg before the dragon dies, there's nothing left to hatch and you'll never have another dragon.
Correct.
It's
Is
cool.
yeah, then yeah, it would be very problematic because then yeah, you're the whole species would then
It could be very dramatic, I guess. But yes, that's really, I mean, we pretty much touched base on everything that I had notes on.
Yep.
And for again, I do want to make sure that I say thank you so much for joining me and going over with this. This is something that I've wanted to talk about for a while, and just I never had the right person to talk to you about it.
I'm glad I could help facilitate that.
Yay! And again, I do want to let everybody know, go find him. I know for a fact that you're on Instagram and that kind of thing. However, I do want to make sure that I ask you to send me some links where
Yeah.
people can reach you, where they can get your books, anything that I can point them your direction with, to send them to me, and I will put them in the description when this episode's posted.
And if you'd like, I can give you a little bit of a blurb right now. All my books can be found on Amazon, but if you go to archivesofthe5kingdoms.com, that's my website. It's a companion site. So if you buy the books, it's got maps and character profiles and location descriptions, all that fun stuff that you would find in the back of the book for free. It has links to purchasing the books directly from me or from Amazon, as well as you can find me on YouTube. I have a channel on there, which is just simply called GKJ Publishing, and I do a show called The Right Way, where we talk book recommendations, author interviews, and creative writing tips.
Perfect. Random question. If one of the listeners wants to potentially get a special signed copy of your book and purchase it directly from you, is that possible?
Absolutely, especially if you purchase it directly from me. I do have copies here, and as soon as I have the information of where it's going and who it's being sent to, I can fill it out and ship it out.
All right, perfect. So again, thank you so much for coming on, everybody. Check the links, listen here, go find him, like him, subscribe to his stuff, check out those books, and I mean, hell, get a signed copy. Why the hell not, right? I think that sums it up for today. So until next time, take care, everyone. See ya.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Please subscribe, rate, and review anywhere you listen. This is more beneficial than you may know and will help others locate the podcast. Don't forget to check out my Patreon page as well. We currently have 2 tiers. The Snallygaster tier that'll get you unedited bonus audio, a sticker, a shout out on the podcast, and access to the private Discord server. The second tier is the Phantom tier, and that'll get you all of the benefits of the Snallygaster tier, plus access to live streams and Q&A sessions, and is the only place you can access all video footage from regular episodes as well as the Patreon exclusive episodes. You can subscribe today at patreon.com/cryptids, creeps, and conspiracy. Don't forget to head over to the TeePublic website and take a look at a variety of merch options that are available. You can also find and follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, TikTok, X, and YouTube. All of these links can be found in the description of this episode under the Linktree hyperlink. Until next time, my friends, dare to believe.